The phone rang once. Then again. Kismet's hand tightened around the steering wheel. He didn't want to answer, not now. Not with her sitting behind him. The ringing grew louder in his head, drilling through the silence. He finally glanced at the screen, and froze. Hamilton General Hospital. His pulse raced. His breath shortened. From the back seat came a voice, smooth, commanding, and edged with ice. "Is something wrong, Mr. Olayemi?" He didn't reply. He pressed accept. "Hello." His voice shook slightly. The voice on the other end was trembling. "Mr. Olayemi, it's your daughter. Her conditions worsened. Please come now." Everything inside him stopped. Then, instinct took over. He turned the steering wheel sharply. Tires screeched. Horns exploded behind them. "What do you think you're doing?" The woman's voice from the back seat was sharp, unyielding, the kind that silenced boardrooms. "Turn this car around immediately." He didn't. He couldn't. His world had narrowed to one thought, his little girl. "Kismet," she snapped. "Have you lost your mind? You're going the wrong way." Still, silence. His jaw locked. Eyes fixed forward. "I said stop this car," she yelled. "You're fired, do you hear me? Fired." He pressed harder on the accelerator. The city blurred by, sunlight flashing across glass buildings, horns crying behind them, the world spinning faster than he could think. And then, the car stopped. The massive glass sign above the building read Hamilton General Hospital. Before she could speak again, Kismet threw the door open and ran, leaving her mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-fury. The door slammed behind him. Inside the Bentley, silence pressed in like a weight. Parkista Ferguson sat perfectly still, her reflection gleaming on the tinted window. The city's most powerful woman, 35, unmarried, CEO of Ferguson Enterprises. A billionaire with a reputation carved from iron and ice. Who was this woman who made men tremble with a glance? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. They called her the Iron Queen of Hamilton. Ruthless. Brilliant. Untouchable. She hired and fired at will, smiled only when the cameras demanded it. But now, she sat alone in a parked car outside a hospital, breathing hard, the faint echo of her driver's footsteps still in her ears. Her perfectly manicured hand reached for her phone. She dialed. One line, busy. Another, busy. She clenched her jaw. "Unbelievable," she muttered. Outside, people rushed past. Nurses, patients, families, all moving in chaos. Inside, Parkista's silence felt heavier than ever. No one had ever disobeyed her before. No one had ever dared. She tapped her fingers on the leather seat, trying to mask her frustration. Then her eyes lifted toward the hospital doors. Through the glass, she caught a glimpse of him, her driver, hunched over, his shoulders shaking, a nurse's hand resting gently on his back. Her heart stuttered. For a moment, she didn't see her driver. She saw a memory, her father years ago, weeping beside a hospital bed. A child, frail and fading. Her twin brother, gone before help could arrive. That memory stabbed through her like lightning. She blinked quickly, pushing it down. No. She couldn't afford that kind of weakness anymore. She straightened in her seat, forced her voice steady. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He has to." But minutes passed. He didn't. Her phone buzzed again, investors calling. She ignored it. For the first time in years, business didn't seem important. Her gaze returned to the hospital. "What could possibly be more important than me?" she murmured. The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. A small girl passed by outside, holding her mother's hand, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Parkista's chest tightened. She looked away, pressing her lips together. She tried to focus, on her phone, on the time, on the meeting she was already late for, but her mind wouldn't obey. Instead, it kept drifting back to that phone call, that trembling voice saying your daughter needs you. It echoed through the car like a ghost. She exhaled slowly, realizing her hands were trembling. For years, she'd built walls around herself, Rules, power, control. Nothing touched her. Nothing broke her. Until now. Outside, the afternoon sun glared across the windshield, painting her in gold. And for a brief second, the ruthless billionaire didn't look ruthless at all, just lost. Her eyes softened, barely noticeable, but real. The hospital doors opened again, nurses rushing a stretcher past. She watched without meaning to, her heart caught between anger and something that felt uncomfortably like empathy. She whispered, barely audible, "Money can't buy life." The sound of her own voice startled her. She shook her head quickly, reclaiming her composure. But something inside had already cracked. She looked again toward the hospital entrance. Still no sign of Kismet. Still no driver. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't call for another one. She stayed, watching, waiting. She didn't know it yet, but the moment that phone rang, her life, and his, began to change forever. The ruthless billionaire had just crossed paths with something far greater than wealth: compassion. So tell me, my dear viewers, what would you have done in Kismet's place? Would you risk everything, even your job, for the one you love? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like if this story already has you feeling something deep. Because this is only the beginning. Who is Parkista Ferguson, and what buried pain made her heart this cold? To understand that, we must go back to the beginning. Years before the power, the empire, the glass office that touched the clouds. Back to a narrow street on the quiet edge of Hamilton, where a little girl once chased butterflies through her father's garden, and where dreams still felt innocent. Her name was Parkista Ferguson, twin daughter of Sir Alexander Ferguson, a man who built houses long before he built empires. Her mother, Lady Clara, was gentle, the kind of woman who smelled of roses and sunlight. And her twin brother Parker was the brave one, the boy who climbed trees for her ribbons and swore he'd protect her forever. But forever doesn't always keep its promise. When they were 10, Parker fell ill. What began as fever became something darker. The doctors said renal failure. The hospital said money first. Their father's business was struggling then. He sold their car, mortgaged the house, begged every friend he had, but it wasn't enough. Every night Parkista held her brother's hand as machines beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then one night, the beeping stopped. Her mother's scream echoed down the corridor. By morning, her mother was gone too, a heart attack, they said. Parkista never forgot her father's face when he returned home that day, eyes empty, hands trembling, grief turning into something colder: resolve. Sir Alexander swore that poverty would never touch their name again. He built, bought, conquered. Within 5 years, Ferguson Enterprises became the backbone of Hamilton's skyline. But in building that fortune, he lost something he didn't notice: his daughter. Parkista learned fast. The world respected strength, not sorrow. So she studied harder than anyone, graduated at 21, and inherited the empire at 29 when her father died in his sleep. The night she signed the succession papers, a board member whispered, "She's too young to lead." She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Watch me." From that moment, the Iron Queen was born. She turned Ferguson Enterprises into a machine, precise, emotionless, profitable. No mistakes. No attachments. No sympathy. Yet inside the woman the tabloids called Hamilton's Untouchable lived the same girl who once begged a nurse to save her brother. She just buried her heart beneath layers of discipline and diamond. Her employees feared her temper, competitors envied her brilliance. She smiled for cameras, spoke like a queen, and slept alone in a mansion that echoed when she breathed. People thought she loved power. But the truth? She feared weakness. Because weakness, in her mind, killed her family. Years rolled on. Deals were made. Fortunes grew. But Parkista never set foot in a hospital again, until today. Sitting alone in that parked Bentley, she didn't realize that fate had brought her right back to where her story had broken. A man fighting to save his child. A voice on the phone begging, "Please come now." Different faces. Same pain. The city outside bustled, unaware that Hamilton's most powerful woman sat remembering a childhood she'd spent decades erasing. She remembered the nurse who once told her, "You can't save everyone, sweetie." At 10 years old, she'd looked up and whispered, "Then I'll save myself." And she did, but at a cost. Power had become her armor, and money her language. It was easier to command than to feel. Easier to fire than to forgive. Until Kismet. That driver, the quiet man she never noticed, had done something no one ever dared. He disobeyed her, not out of pride but love. Love for his daughter. And that kind of love was the very thing Parkista had buried the day she lost her brother. She pressed her hand against her chest, almost as if testing whether her heart was still there. It beat, slowly, painfully, like something waking from a long sleep. She whispered to herself, "Why does this feel familiar?" Her eyes drifted again toward the hospital doors. The same way her father once looked through the glass waiting for news that never came. For the first time in years, she felt small and human. A soft knock pulled her from thought. A parking attendant stood by the window. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need assistance?" Parkista blinked, her expression cold again. "No. I'm fine." He nodded, walked away. But the question lingered. Was she? Her phone buzzed once more, Board Director Shaw calling. She stared at the name, thumb hovering over answer. Then slowly, she pressed decline. Somewhere deep inside, she realized this wasn't a business problem. This was something money couldn't fix. She closed her eyes and whispered a name she hadn't said in years. Parker. And for the first time since she was 10, tears burned behind her eyelids. She brushed them away before they fell, because even in grief, the Iron Queen refused to be seen crying. But her walls were cracking. And through those cracks, compassion began to leak back in. She didn't know it yet, but that single act of defiance, her driver's desperate run into the hospital, was the beginning of her own healing. Life had brought her full circle. If you're still here listening, my beautiful family and friends, tell me, do you believe people can truly change? Can a heart frozen by pain ever learn to feel again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Because for Parkista Ferguson, change was already on its way. The woman who built an empire from grief was about to discover that sometimes, salvation doesn't come from power, but from the unlikeliest places. And as she sat there watching the hospital doors, unaware of what was about to unfold, a single tear slipped down, catching the sunlight like a diamond. The ruthless billionaire had no idea that her next decision would alter not only her life, but the lives of two strangers who would soon become her family. But that is where the story turns. She sat there for several more minutes, still staring at those sliding glass doors. Something in her chest, a quiet ache, a memory, a pulse, wouldn't let her leave. She told herself she was only waiting for her driver to come back. But deep down, she knew the truth. Curiosity had turned into concern. Concern into something she hadn't felt in decades, empathy. Parkista took a slow breath, unfastened her seatbelt, and stepped out of the car. The heat of the afternoon hit her first, then the rush of sound, engines, voices, footsteps. The world felt too alive, too raw. She adjusted her sunglasses, her heels clicking across the pavement as she walked toward the hospital doors. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and sorrow greeted her like an old ghost. Her pace slowed. She hadn't walked these halls since she was a child, since the night she lost her brother. The reception desk buzzed with phones and hurried whispers. She approached a nurse, her tone still carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm looking for one of my employees," she said. "He came in a few minutes ago. His name is Kismet Olayemi." The nurse nodded, then pointed toward the pediatric wing. "Down that corridor, ma'am. Room 208. But," she hesitated, "please be quiet inside. It's a critical case." Critical. That word landed like a stone in Parkista's stomach. She followed the corridor, walls lined with faded paintings of rainbows and smiling suns. The same ones she'd seen when she was 10. Her heels softened to careful steps. When she reached the doorway, she stopped. Through the small glass window she saw him, her driver, sitting beside a hospital bed, his face buried in his hands. Beside him on the bed lay a little girl hooked to machines, her chest rising shallowly under thin hospital sheets. She couldn't have been older than 10. Too small, too pale. For a moment, Parkista forgot how to breathe. It wasn't just what she was seeing. It was what it brought back. The smell of antiseptic, the faint hum of oxygen, the rhythmic beeping of a machine trying to hold on to life. And in that moment, she was no longer Parkista Ferguson, the billionaire. She was just a sister again, standing beside her brother's bed, begging a doctor for a miracle that never came. Her throat tightened. Kismet lifted his head, eyes red and swollen. He froze when he saw her. "Miss Ferguson," he stammered, standing abruptly. I'm sorry for what I did. Please, I understand if you fire me. I had no choice." She didn't answer. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and then at the girl. "What's her name?" she asked quietly. "Star," he whispered. "She's my daughter." A nurse entered, carrying a clipboard. She recognized Parkista instantly. "Miss Ferguson? I didn't know you were here. What's wrong with the child?" Parkista asked. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the doctor nearby. He stepped forward, removing his mask. "End-stage kidney failure. We've been trying to find a match for weeks. But her father isn't compatible, and the donor list is long." Parkista's gaze stayed fixed on the little girl's face, fragile, peaceful, unaware of the storm around her. Kismet's voice broke. "They said she doesn't have much time left." Something inside Parkista shattered. Not loudly, quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. The air felt thick, heavy, suffocating. She turned toward the doctor, her voice trembling for the first time in years. "If someone could donate, would it help?" He blinked, surprised. "Yes, if we can find a match." She paused, just long enough for everyone to think she was joking, then said it. "Test me." The room fell silent. Kismet's head snapped up. "Miss Ferguson, no. You can't." "Test me," she repeated, firmer this time. "Now." The nurse hurried out, speechless. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, they drew her blood. Kismet tried to speak, his voice shaking. "You don't have to do this. She's my daughter, not your problem." Parkista looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, but something softer. "She's a child. That's reason enough." For the next hour, she sat in silence, waiting for the results. The ticking clock felt louder than her heartbeat. When the doctor finally returned, his face said everything before his mouth did. "It's a perfect match." Kismet gasped. The words barely made sense. A match. Parkista exhaled. "Slowly. Then do it." The doctor blinked. "Miss Ferguson, you understand the risks?" "I do," she said. "Prepare the papers." Kismet stepped closer, desperate. "Please, you'll lose so much time. You have a business meeting, you have." She cut him off. "I have a chance to save a life. That's more than I've had in years." And for the first time since anyone had met her, the Iron Queen smiled. Not coldly. Not strategically. Just quietly, like someone rediscovering their humanity. The surgery was scheduled within hours. As the nurses led her away to prep, Kismet followed, his voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" She looked at him with eyes that carried both sorrow and peace. "Because once, someone I loved didn't get that chance. And I swore if I ever could, I'd make sure another child did." He stood there, speechless, tears streaming freely. As they wheeled her past, Parkista reached out, touched his arm gently, and said one last thing before disappearing behind the surgical doors. "Take care of her. That's all the return I need." Hours passed. The surgery began. In the waiting room, Kismet prayed for both of them, the daughter he loved, and the woman he barely knew who was willing to risk her life for her. And when the doctor finally came out, his mask pulled down and a smile forming on his tired face, Kismet collapsed to his knees in gratitude. Both had made it. Both were safe. That day, Hamilton's Ruthless Billionaire gave away something money could never buy, a part of herself. If you've made it this far, my beautiful family and friends, tell me in the comments, do you believe compassion can change even the hardest hearts? And what would you do if you had the power to save a stranger's child? Let me know below, and don't forget to click subscribe, because tomorrow's story will remind you just how powerful love can be. Because for Parkista Ferguson, this was only the beginning. Her empire might fall, but her humanity had finally risen. When Parkista opened her eyes, the ceiling was white, the lights too bright, and the world far too quiet. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the ache in her side reminded her, she'd given a part of herself away. Her throat was dry. "The child," she whispered. A nurse smiled softly. Stable. Both of you are. You saved her. Those words settled over her like sunlight through glass. You saved her. For years, she had signed contracts that built towers, moved markets, changed skylines, but never once had she saved a life. She tried to sit up, but the nurse stopped her. Easy, Miss Ferguson. You need rest. Rest, a word she'd never truly understood. On the bedside table lay her phone. The screen was filled with missed calls, board meeting, critical, investor summit, urgent, press inquiry, crisis unfolding. She had missed them all. Her empire had moved on without her. Across the hallway, another voice drifted in, a child's laughter. Star was awake. The sound pulled a smile from Parkista, faint but real. It was proof that her pain had meaning. A knock came at the door. Kismet stepped in, hesitant, holding a bouquet of lilies. His eyes were swollen, but this time with gratitude, not fear. I didn't know what flowers billionaires like, he said quietly. So I brought the ones that reminded me of peace. Parkista almost laughed. After what I did, peace sounds perfect. He set the flowers down and bowed his head. You didn't just save her life, Miss Ferguson. You saved mine too. She looked at him, the man she'd once fired in fury, and saw the sincerity in his trembling hands. You're a good father, Kismet. I'm just a man who ran out of options, he replied. And you became the miracle I prayed for. A silence hung between them, heavy with things neither could yet say. Then her phone buzzed again, a new message flashing across the screen. Board decision in progress. Emergency vote on leadership. Her smile faded. She unlocked the phone, eyes narrowing as she read the details. By missing the investor summit, she had violated a critical clause. The board was voting to remove her as CEO. Kismet noticed the shift in her face. Is something wrong? She forced a faint smile. Just business. But inside, her heart thudded. Everything she had built, every sleepless night, every deal, every sacrifice, was slipping away. For once, she didn't know how to fight it. Hours later, her lawyer arrived. Parkista, the vote's already in motion. You've lost major investor confidence. Unless we can prove immediate liquidity support, they'll take control of Ferguson Enterprises within 24 hours. She closed her eyes. A lifetime of control, and yet, this she could not stop. When the lawyer left, Kismet sat beside her bed. I heard what he said, he murmured. You're losing everything because of me. She shook her head weakly. Because of us. I made a choice. I'd make it again. But why? Because power isn't worth anything if you have to trade your soul to keep it. He was silent for a long time, then leaned forward. What if it doesn't end this way? What if I can help you save it? She frowned. You. He smiled faintly. I wasn't always a driver. I studied business strategy. I used to design logistics systems for supply chains in Lagos before my company collapsed. I've been watching yours. I know where it's bleeding money. She studied him, a man who had once been invisible, now speaking with quiet certainty. And why would you help me? He shrugged. Because you saved my daughter. Because you looked at us like people, not numbers. And because I believe the empire you built doesn't deserve to die, it just needs a heartbeat again. Something in his words struck her deeply. For the first time, she saw that compassion and strength could coexist. They spent hours talking, her, still pale from surgery, him, sketching diagrams on the back of a medical chart. He explained how diversifying her logistics branch, partnering with smaller tech startups, and relocating certain operations could stabilize the company. His mind was sharp, creative, daring, everything her board had stopped being. By evening, a new plan had formed between them. Parkista leaned back against her pillows. If this works, you'll have saved my company. He smiled. Then I'll finally repay you, won't I? She looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe some debts can't be repaid. Maybe they can only be shared. When the nurse returned to check her vitals, she found them both still discussing projections and merger terms like old partners rediscovering a dream. Days later, when Parkista was discharged, headlines exploded. Ferguson Enterprises in freefall, CEO under fire after mysterious absence. Hamilton's Iron Queen loses her crown. Cameras waited outside the hospital doors. She stepped out slowly, in a simple coat, no jewelry, no entourage. Just Kismet walking beside her, pushing Star's wheelchair. The flash of bulbs painted them in light. Questions flew like arrows. Miss Ferguson, is it true you were hospitalized? Who's the man with you? Have you been removed as CEO? She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked straight at the cameras, and said calmly, yes, I missed a meeting. Because I was saving a life. If that costs me my title, so be it. That night, her words went viral. Not as scandal, but as grace. Thousands commented, calling her the Iron Heart of Hamilton. Still, inside the company, numbers were collapsing. Investors pulled out. Deadlines loomed. Parkista sat in her living room, exhaustion washing over her. Kismet entered quietly, laptop in hand. I've prepared everything, he said. If you trust me, I can present this to your board tomorrow. She looked up. Do you really think they'll listen to a driver? He smiled. Then don't introduce me as one. The next morning, Parkista walked into the boardroom, still weak but standing tall. When the chairman sneered, you risked everything for a stranger's child, she replied. I risked everything to remember I'm human. Then she gestured toward Kismet. This man has a plan that can save Ferguson Enterprises. Hear him before you vote. And when Kismet spoke, clear, confident, unshaken, the room listened. By the end of the meeting, the vote was postponed. The empire still stood. Parkista looked across the table at him, eyes shining. Thank you, she whispered. He shook his head. Don't thank me. You taught me what real power is. My beautiful family and friends, tell me, what do you think real power means? Is it money, position, or the courage to do what's right even when it costs everything? Drop your answer in the comments, and click subscribe, because in the next part, you'll see how this story of sacrifice turns into something even deeper, a story of redemption, partnership, and unexpected love. The morning after the board meeting felt different. The city of Hamilton woke to headlines that didn't just talk about profits or mergers. They talked about Parkista Ferguson, the billionaire who gave her kidney to save her driver's child. For the first time, her name wasn't followed by words like ruthless or cold. People called her brave, human, selfless. But Parkista didn't read the articles. She was sitting by her bedroom window, holding a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the sunrise as if it might tell her what came next. The empire she built was still on the edge of collapse. Investors were cautious, the media was ruthless, and the board trusted her less than ever. But inside, something had shifted. The woman who once measured life in numbers now measured it in heartbeats. She'd seen what mattered, a child smiling again, a father's gratitude, and the peace that came with doing something good simply because she could. Kismet arrived that morning with his daughter, Star. The little girl, her skin now glowing with recovery, walked into the room carrying a handmade card. Miss Parkista, she said shyly, Daddy says you're my hero. Parkista smiled, genuinely, softly. I think you're the hero, Star. You fought harder than anyone I know. Star giggled, and for a moment, Parkista forgot about the world outside those walls. Kismet watched her, eyes full of quiet admiration. He'd seen many sides of her, the fury, the pride, the power, but this version was different. Calm. Warm. Real. Do you ever miss being feared? He asked suddenly, half teasing, half curious. She chuckled. Maybe a little. But I've learned something, Kismet. Fear makes people obey you. Kindness makes them believe in you. He nodded slowly. And people who believe in you will fight beside you. She turned toward him. Will you? The question caught him off guard. Me? Yes, she said. Help me rebuild Ferguson Enterprises. Not as what it was, but as what it should have been. Asterisk. He hesitated. You're asking a driver to help run your empire? I'm asking a man I trust, she replied. That single sentence, simple, sincere, changed everything. In the weeks that followed, the two worked side by side. The office that once echoed with tension began to hum with something new, purpose. Employees watched in disbelief as their boss arrived early, greeted them by name, and asked for opinions. Parkista's once icy boardroom became a place of open discussion. She gave Kismet a position as director of strategy, shocking everyone. Some whispered. Others doubted. But results silenced them all. Together, They restructured Ferguson Enterprises from the inside out, reducing executive excess, improving worker welfare, and reinvesting in community housing projects under the Ferguson Foundation. The same streets where her father once begged for help now bore her company's emblem, but this time, it stood for hope. Kismet's ideas brought innovation. Parkista's leadership gave them strength. And slowly, the company's numbers began to rise again. One afternoon, as they reviewed quarterly reports, Kismet smiled. "You did it," he said. "Your empire's back." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Our empire?" He laughed quietly. "You really mean that?" "I do," she said. "Because it wouldn't exist without you." He looked at her then, not as a boss, not as a billionaire, but as a woman who had finally learned to be free. Weeks turned into months. Hamilton's media crowned her once more, but with a different title this time, the Queen with a Heart. And she carried that crown with quiet grace. At a charity event months later, Parkista stood on stage before hundreds, announcing a new initiative to fund pediatric kidney care. Her voice didn't tremble, it rang clear and full of conviction. "Years ago," she said, "I believed success meant control. Today, I know it means compassion. The true measure of power isn't how many people bow to you, it's how many lives you lift." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Kismet watched from the audience, Star seated beside him, clapping proudly. When Parkista stepped down, the little girl ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "Thank you for giving me a future," she whispered. Parkista's throat tightened. "You gave me one too, sweetheart." Later that evening, the two adults stood outside under the soft glow of city lights. The night was calm, the wind cool, and for once, there were no reporters, no shareholders, no noise. Just them. Kismet broke the silence first. "You know, when I first started driving for you, I thought you were the coldest person I'd ever met." She smiled faintly. "I probably was." "And now?" he asked. She turned toward him, her eyes soft but sure. "Now I'm someone I actually recognize again." There was a long pause. A gentle one. Then he said, "You're not just my employer anymore. You're my friend." She looked at him, holding his gaze for a moment longer than friendship usually allows. "Maybe more than that," she said quietly. He blinked, caught between surprise and emotion. "You mean?" She smiled, cutting him off. "I mean that some bonds are built on gratitude, but others, on grace." He didn't respond, words weren't enough. He simply reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. For a woman who once built walls higher than skyscrapers, letting someone in felt like the bravest thing she'd ever done. The next morning, headlines read, "Parkista Ferguson launches Ferguson Foundation for Children, the Queen of Hamilton returns, but this time, she leads with her heart." And in offices across the city, people who had once feared her name now spoke it with pride. Her empire was thriving, but more importantly, so was she. Because for the first time in her life, Parkista Ferguson had everything her billions could never buy: peace, purpose, and love. For months, Hamilton had learned to see its queen differently. The empire she rebuilt now breathed with life again. Employees smiled when she walked in. Investors praised her new policies. And yet, behind all the triumph, something else was growing, quietly, tenderly, between Parkista and Kismet. It began with late-night meetings that turned into long conversations. Then came shared laughter, private smiles, unspoken understanding. By the time winter rolled across the city, she no longer thought of him as the driver. He was her confidant, her balance, her reminder that humanity and power could live in the same heart. But peace rarely lasts without a test. One evening, Parkista returned from a charity dinner to find Kismet waiting outside her home, shoulders tense, eyes clouded. The look on his face wasn't gratitude or admiration. It was fear. "Kismet? What's wrong?" He hesitated. "There's something you need to know. About me. About my past." Her heartbeat quickened. "What past?" He exhaled. "Before I worked for you, I wasn't just a logistics consultant. The company I worked for, Racing Global, went bankrupt 3 years ago after an audit. They accused me of financial misconduct. I didn't steal anything, Parkista. But they made me the scapegoat to protect their directors. My name was blacklisted. No one would hire me. That's why I became a driver. I was just trying to keep my daughter alive. She went still. A scandal. A man accused of fraud. Her board would have a field day if this ever reached them. And she had just made him director of strategy. Kismet saw the flicker of shock in her eyes. I should have told you earlier. I didn't because I thought if you knew, you'd never give me a chance. He stepped closer, voice cracking. Everything we built, it's real. I swear I've changed nothing, hidden nothing from you now. But if you need to fire me, I'll understand. Parkista turned away, walking toward the wide window that overlooked the city. The skyline glittered, the same skyline her father once dreamed of. And now, it reflected her choice. The old Parkista would have ended it there. One scandal, one risk, cut it out. Protect the empire, maintain the name. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She faced him again, calm but firm. Kismet, tell me something. If I lose everything because of you, would you still stand beside me? He blinked, stunned. Of course I would. Then she said quietly, let's face it together. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. An anonymous email had leaked Kismet's past to the media. Ferguson Enterprises hires former fraud suspect. The board erupted in panic. Some called for his removal, others whispered that Parkista's compassion had finally blinded her. A meeting was called. The room was full of raised voices, accusations, and fear. The chairman slammed his palm on the table. You're risking our reputation for a man with a criminal record. Parkista stood slowly, her voice calm but sharp. Correction, a false record. You all read gossip columns but not court verdicts. The case was dismissed. The company framed him. He lost everything because he stood for integrity. That's the kind of man I want in my company. The room fell silent. One director sneered. And if the investors pull out? She looked him dead in the eye. Then we rebuild again. But this time with people who have souls. No one argued after that. Later that evening, she found Kismet alone in the break room, staring at his phone, another article flashing across the screen. You defended me, he said softly. You could have denied everything. She shrugged, a half-smile touching her lips. I once thought strength meant standing alone. Turns out, it means standing with someone when everyone else walks away. He stared at her for a long moment. Why me, Parkista? Because you remind me of who I used to be, before I forgot that people matter. Something in him broke then, the years of shame and exhaustion spilling out in a single breath. Do you know what it feels like, he whispered, to be punished for honesty? She stepped closer. Yes. It feels like being human in a world that rewards cruelty. Their eyes met, holding more than gratitude, an unspoken connection that neither dared to name. But when Star's laughter echoed down the hallway, breaking the heaviness, Parkista smiled. Go home, Kismet. Your daughter's waiting. Tomorrow, we start again. Over the next week, the company stood firm. The scandal faded faster than anyone expected. Investors realized the story had only strengthened Ferguson's image, proof that compassion, not corruption, ran its core. One journalist even wrote, Parkista Ferguson has turned grace into governance. The Iron Queen has become the people's queen. But for Parkista, the real victory wasn't public approval, it was personal peace. One night, she found herself on the mansion balcony, city lights stretching endlessly below. Kismet joined her, silent as always, carrying 2 cups of tea. You know, he said quietly, every time I think of what you've done for me and Star, I don't know how to thank you. She took the cup from his hand. You already have. You helped me rediscover my purpose. He hesitated, then said softly, you also helped me believe in love again. Her breath caught. For a long time, neither spoke. The air between them felt fragile, alive, inevitable. She finally whispered, maybe we both needed saving, and didn't know it. He smiled, eyes glinting in the city glow. Maybe so. And in that small moment, simple, quiet, unforced, the woman who once lived for control finally surrendered to connection. My beautiful family and friends, I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who reminded you how to feel again? Someone who helped you heal the parts of yourself you thought were gone forever? Share your answer in the comments, and click subscribe, because tomorrow's story will show how love, trust, and redemption can rebuild more than empires. It can rebuild hearts. Because for Parkista Ferguson and Kismet Olayemi, the story was far from over. Spring turned Hamilton into glass and rain. Inside Ferguson Enterprises, everything glittered again: profits, headlines, hope. Parkista and Kismet worked side by side, and the city whispered that the Queen of Hamilton had finally found her king. Then came the storm. It began with a phone call at dawn. A tremor in the global markets. A foreign partner defaulted on a deal worth millions. By noon, stock prices plunged. By nightfall, journalists camped outside the company gates, waiting to see if the miracle woman could survive another fall. Parkista read the numbers on her tablet, jaw tight. "We'll lose half our value by morning," she said. Kismet placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then we start again in the morning." She almost smiled. "You always think there's a tomorrow." "There always is," he said. "Until we stop believing in it." But this storm wasn't only financial. A larger one brewed within. Star collapsed during school rehearsal, her body rejecting the very kidney that had saved her. The hospital cold. Kismet drove like lightning, fear tearing through him. When Parkista arrived minutes later, the doctors spoke in gentle tones that only made it worse. "It's early rejection. We'll do everything we can." She froze, that antiseptic smell again, the beeping monitors, the feeling of helplessness she thought she'd buried forever. Kismet's hands shook. "I can't lose her, Parkista. Not after everything." "You won't," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whom she was convincing. For 2 days they lived inside that hospital room, watching machines blink. Business updates piled on her phone, reporters demanded statements. She silenced them all. The woman who once ruled by schedules now prayed by a child's bedside. On the third night, when the rain lashed the windows, Star stirred. "Daddy. Miss Parkista." They leaned close. Her voice was thin but steady. "Can I go home soon?" Parkista felt tears sting her eyes. "Yes, baby. You're going home." And she did. The crisis passed. The doctors called it a miracle of compatibility, the donated kidney adapting again, healing itself. When they left the hospital together, Parkista looked at the skyline and realized she had stopped measuring success in buildings. She had measured it in breaths. Back at Ferguson Enterprises, chaos waited. The markets had settled, but opportunists had risen. One investor, the same director who once doubted her, had secretly arranged to sell the company's core assets during her absence. She confronted him in the boardroom, calm but burning. "You tried to sell the soul of this company for your own safety," she said. He smirked. "Compassion doesn't keep shareholders happy." She stepped closer. "Maybe not. But it keeps me human." She removed his access that day, her signature swift, final. Then she turned to the room. This company was rebuilt on grace. Anyone who can't lead with that can leave. No one moved. Weeks later, Ferguson Enterprises launched its new branch, the STAR Initiative, dedicated to funding pediatric transplants across the country. At the ceremony, Parkista stood beside Kismet and Star as photographers flashed. Star wore a white dress and held a small card that read, "Thank you for my tomorrows." Parkista's voice trembled as she spoke, "Empires crumble. Fortunes fade. But compassion, that's the one investment that never fails." The audience rose to their feet. After the event, on the balcony overlooking Hamilton Bay, the wind carried the smell of rain and jasmine. Kismet stood beside her, quiet. "You saved my daughter twice," he said. "Once with your body, once with your heart." She smiled faintly. "And you saved my soul." He turned toward her. "So where do we go from here?" She looked out over the water, lights dancing on the waves. "Forward," she said. "Always forward." He took her hand, no hesitation this time. Their fingers intertwined, not as employer and employee, but as equals bound by something far stronger than circumstance. For the first time in her life, Parkista Ferguson allowed herself to lean into another's warmth, to believe that love didn't weaken power, it purified it. And somewhere below, the city she had built kept glowing. Ferguson Enterprises thrived. Star's laughter echoed through its halls. And Hamilton finally understood, its queen had been reborn not from steel, but from kindness. My beautiful family and friends, tell me, what do you think truly saves a person? Power, money, or love? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, click subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that storms don't destroy good souls, they cleanse them. Because for Parkista Ferguson, every storm had led her here, to the promise she never saw coming. Years passed. The towers of Hamilton gleamed beneath new skies, their mirrored faces catching sunlight like blessings. At the top of one of them, the Ferguson Foundation headquarters, a marble plaque bore a simple inscription. Built not by power, but by compassion. Parkista Ferguson. Inside, the office that once symbolized control now radiated warmth. Photos of smiling children lined the walls. Flowers filled corners that used to hold trophies. And behind a modest desk sat the woman who had once ruled an empire with fear, now guiding it with grace. Parkista looked up from her reports as Star burst into the room, 13 now, radiant and full of life. "Miss Parkista," she said, running into her arms. "Dad says dinner's ready." Parkista laughed softly, a sound that years ago, the city thought it would never hear. "Tell him I'll be down in a minute, sweetheart." Star nodded and darted out, leaving the door open just enough for the scent of home-cooked stew to drift in. For a moment, Parkista sat back, letting the memory of everything they had endured flow through her, the night in the car, the hospital corridors, the sterile lights that had once meant loss but later became salvation. She had walked through storms and come out new. That evening, they ate together in the small garden behind her mansion, now their family home. Kismet poured her a glass of sparkling water and smiled. "Do you ever miss the old days, the chaos, the boardrooms, the endless chase?" She smiled back. "Sometimes. But then I remember how empty it felt. Power is lonely when it doesn't serve anyone." He nodded. "And now it does." "Now it does," she agreed. Star laughed, chasing fireflies between the hedges, her giggle echoing through the twilight. Parkista watched her, the child who'd changed everything, and felt peace settle over her like the evening breeze. Weeks later, the city gathered for an event unlike any other, the unveiling of the new Hamilton Children's Hospital, fully funded by the Ferguson Foundation. Parkista stood at the podium beside Kismet and Star, the crowd stretching as far as she could see. Reporters, doctors, families, all waiting to hear from the woman whose name had become synonymous with hope. She spoke simply, her voice steady. "Once, I believed that success meant never needing anyone. Then life reminded me that none of us stand alone. This hospital is not mine, it belongs to every parent who's prayed for a miracle, every child who deserves a tomorrow, and every soul who chooses kindness over judgment." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "My father built an empire of stone. My mother built a home of love. Today, I build in their memory, with both." The applause rolled like thunder. When she stepped away from the microphone, Kismet met her halfway, his eyes shining. "You've done it," he said. "You've changed everything." She shook her head softly. "No, we did." He leaned closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "And after all this time, there's one thing I've never said." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He smiled gently. "I love you, Parkista." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world blurred around them, the lights, the cameras, the applause, fading into something timeless. She took his hand and whispered, "I know. And I love you too." The crowd erupted again as they turned to wave, but the look they shared said more than any headline ever could. Months later, life found its rhythm again. Kismet handled the foundation's operations. Parkista led its vision. Every decision they made carried the quiet strength of people who had lost, learned, and loved. On quiet Sundays, she visited the old Ferguson cemetery, 2 graves, side by side, her parents, and a small plaque for her brother Parker. She placed white lilies there every week, and this time, she smiled while doing it. "You'd like him, Parker," she whispered. "He makes me laugh again." A warm breeze moved through the trees, and for the first time in years, she felt something she'd once thought impossible: forgiveness. Forgiveness for the world. And for herself. That summer, a journalist wrote the definitive feature on her life. The Iron Queen of Hamilton was once feared for her precision. Now she is loved for her compassion. She lost an empire and built a legacy. And in the process, she reminded the world that the greatest wealth is a heart that still knows how to give. The story spread across nations. But to Parkista, it wasn't fame, it was closure. One evening, as the city lights shimmered below, she stood on her balcony with Kismet. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't answered that phone that day?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Then you would have been fired, and I'd still be miserable." They both laughed. Then she said, "Funny how life turns everything we think we want into everything we really need." He nodded, resting his head lightly against hers. "Maybe that's what miracles look like, mistakes that turn out right." As the camera of life zoomed out on the Ferguson estate, the garden lights shimmered around three silhouettes: a woman who found her soul, a man who found redemption, and a child who was never meant to be lost. In that quiet glow, Parkista Ferguson finally understood: the truest empire is not built in glass or gold, it's built in hearts that choose compassion over power. Dawn broke over Hamilton like a quiet promise. The skyline shimmered gold, and the morning breeze carried the hum of a city that had finally learned to slow down and breathe. For the first time in many years, Parkista Ferguson woke without an alarm, without a schedule, and without the weight of an empire pressing on her chest. She sat by the window, watching the world come alive below, the baker opening his shop, children hurrying to school, nurses heading to early shifts at the hospital that now bore her name. She smiled softly. That was her empire now, not numbers on a screen, but lives she could touch. Behind her, Kismet's voice drifted in from the kitchen. "Coffee or tea, my queen?" he teased. "Tea," she called back. "You know coffee makes me think too fast." He appeared with two steaming mugs, setting one in front of her. "I like it when you think. You built a world from it." She looked up at him, her expression warm. "No, Kismet. We built one worth living in." They sat in silence for a while, sipping quietly, the kind of silence that doesn't need words, the kind built by trust and love. Star ran into the room moments later, her laughter scattering the stillness like sunlight. "Mom, Dad, look!" she shouted, waving her school award. "They said I'm the best in science." Parkista's heart swelled. "Of course you are," she said, pulling her into a hug. "You're a Ferguson now. We don't give up, we grow." Star giggled. "Can I build rockets someday?" "You can build anything," Parkista replied, kissing her forehead. Kismet watched them, his smile soft and full. "You know, sometimes I still wake up thinking all of this was a dream." She turned toward him. "It was," she said, "until we started believing in it." Later that afternoon, Parkista visited her old office for the last time. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, the floor where she had once ruled, feared, and felt completely alone. Now it was different. Her desk was smaller, her walls were full of pictures, employees, children from the foundation, and one frame in the center, her, Kismet, and Star at the hospital ribbon cutting. She stood for a moment, tracing the edges of that photo. "This is what it was all for," she whispered. A young assistant entered shyly. "Miss Ferguson, the board wanted to confirm. Are you sure you're stepping down?" Parkista smiled gently. "Yes. It's time the next generation leads. My chapter here is complete." The assistant hesitated. "We'll never have another you." She turned, her eyes kind. "Good. You're not supposed to." When the girl left, Parkista took one last look around. The glass reflected her image, older, wiser, softer. The Iron Queen was gone. In her place stood a woman made of strength and mercy. She reached for her pen and signed her final letter as CEO. "To those who follow, remember, an empire without empathy is just empty walls. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow." Parkista Ferguson. She placed the pen down and walked away, leaving the office door open behind her. That evening, Hamilton held its annual charity gala, the same event she once attended for power. This time, she was there for gratitude. The mayor presented her with the city's highest honor, the Hamilton Humanitarian Medal, for transforming business into benevolence. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose to their feet. Kismet stood near the front, Star beside him, clapping proudly. She began her speech, her voice steady, calm, and full of heart. "Years ago, I was known for the deals I closed and the people I fired. I thought strength was measured in fear. But one day, a man defied me, not out of rebellion, but out of love for his daughter. That day changed everything." The crowd listened in stillness. That man taught me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the one currency that never loses value. And that little girl, Star, reminded me that no matter how dark our past is, we can always choose light again. She looked toward them, smiling through tears. So tonight, I don't just thank you for this medal. I thank life for giving me a second chance. And I promise to spend the rest of my days giving others theirs. The applause was thunderous, not the kind born of admiration, but of love. Later, beneath the glow of chandeliers, she found Kismet standing alone on the balcony, looking out over Hamilton. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. He chuckled. "Sometimes I still see the day I turned that car around. You were furious." She laughed softly. "I was a storm back then." "And now?" he asked. She looked at him with a smile that held the peace of every lesson learned. "Now I'm the calm after it." They stood there together, the woman who had once ruled an empire and the man who had once driven her car, two souls who found redemption in each other's strength. Below them, the city lights flickered like 1,000 small stories waiting to be told. And that, my beautiful family and friends, is how the story of the ruthless billionaire ends, not in loss, but in legacy. Not in power, but in peace. Parkista Ferguson's journey reminds us that sometimes, the greatest empires are not built by force, but by forgiveness. Because kindness doesn't just change others. It changes us. So tell me, dear friends, what's your own legacy going to be? If life gave you a second chance, what would you build with it? Share your answer in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, click subscribe, because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another powerful story that will remind you, love is the only empire that never falls.